Welcome folks. This is the follow-up video from the other copper plumbing pipe cutting of it and the measuring and cutting of it rather. And in this installment video, the follow-up I was saying there, I mentioned in the other videos that I would follow up by showing you how to solder the fittings onto the pipe and what to be watching out for, more or less. So I guess before I really get started, let's assume that you might be doing some household plumbing and you're near some old floor joists or wall studs or something that's flammable, anything that, like wood or anything like that, is to always make sure that you either wet it down really good with water or get kind of a heat shield. This is just a piece of scrap sheet metal I'm using for an example. So if you were to be soldering up, say if on this side here there was a wall stud or wall joist or whatever, you can have your flame on the opposite side, and what this sheet metal will do is it'll prevent the flame from getting to the wood and starting a house fire. Every now and again on the news you hear some construction related fire starts, and a lot of times it could be started by a plumber's torch, guy not being careful and trying to avoid those kind of things. So just a safety precaution. So what I'll do is show you what I basically got here. I've already prepared this this plumbing elbow with a short piece of pipe in here, which I'll be soldering onto this pipe here. Oh, which way will we go? Probably that way there, once we're said and done. I've already prepared this one fitting I was just showing you with the pipe already, but I'll show you how the preparation actually takes place. I'll do the elbow first, or whatever fitting that you're trying to solder into. We're using 1/2 inch inside diameter copper plumbing pipe, and this is the fitting that goes on it. I found a really good way. There's probably some specific kind of cleaners, like a wire brush or whatever, but the thing with copper, if you notice here, this copper is very dull brown color. Now you'll see after I shine this up with some sandpaper just how shiny it gets. It's like a copper colored mirror, if you will. And in order to have a successful and lasting, dependable solder joint on any plumbing pipe, is that you have to make sure that it's mirror shiny, really shiny and clean. You can't get it too clean. Okay, so I'll do the fitting first just so that I won't be messing up the nice shine I'm going to put on there. I found a AA battery fits inside the hole size of this fitting, and I just wrapped a piece. What I like to use mostly around the house here is 100 grit aluminum oxide sandpaper. It works. It's a good all-purpose thing for wood and everything. The aluminum oxide is quite a good sandpaper. It's long-lasting and it's quite durable for the most part. So what you want to do before you start doing any soldering is to make sure that the inside where it's going to be touching down on the pipe inside the hole there is shiny like you wouldn't believe. You might think that's clean now, but you got to get in there with something, whether it's a specific brush made for plumbing. But like I say, you can get away with 100 grit aluminum oxide sandpaper wrapped around a AA battery. Works pretty good, or whatever else you find that works in there. So just get in there and then you just work it around, circles, excuse me. And then when you think you've got it, have a look inside there. You'll see scratches, which also probably helps the solder to stick too, because it's not exactly mirror smooth. It's a little bit of roughage there, so it gives us something more to grab onto. But make sure that's nice and shiny and clean, and I'll show you what I mean by nice and shiny and clean by doing the outside diameter of this pipe here, where the fitting will be sliding on, and then we'll put some flux which cleans and facilitates or helps to make the solder bond, if you will, to the copper pipe. So same thing again, some 100 grit aluminum oxide sandpaper, and just basically get it and just work it around. If you can go spin in circles, all the better, but for the way I got it on this workbench here, you can do about 1 inch of it. You can even do it the old shoe shine method if you want. If you have a longer strip, you can go like this all the way around. It's not really too fussy how you do it, it's just the final result. You'll find it gets stuck, and do what you got to do, right? And just maybe the shoe shine method might just work on this. But that's what's basically what you're doing is you can see probably in the video how much shinier that is compared to this section here where it's oxidized and been sitting for a number of years. You might even find some green stuff growing on copper. I believe they call it verdigrease, if I'm not mistaken. So that's all you basically have to do is find the sandpaper so it'll work. Get it nice and clean and shiny all the way around. Check all the way around. Make sure there's no dull spots, because wherever you got a dull spot, that solder will refuse to stick. Okay, so then once you got it there, you can make sure there's no metal particles like copper particles or any shavings in there, because once the water supply is turned on when the piping's all finished, that'll make its way into your faucet, shut-off valve, what have you, and it'll just destroy the seat, the valve mechanism per se. So wipe it down, make sure everything's clean and dry, no grease. Excuse me. Then I'll just mention a thing about the solder and the flux. This is some old school stuff. It's just for regular around the house kind of stuff, not plumbing specific these days. They have special solder, probably doesn't have lead in it anymore, and special flux, so it's non-toxic for drinking supply water. So when you go to your home improvement store, you'll probably be seeing that when you ask them for some flux, which is a cleaner paste, and it helps the solder to flow and bond. And same thing with the solder, like I say, they make probably unleaded, if you will. So you just get a little bit of this stuff. I just use my finger, I'm not too fussy. You can use rubber gloves, do whatever you want to do, and just give it a little smear on the outside where it's all shiny. Once you've done that, it won't oxidize anymore. So you got a little bit of time to play with it, but the thing is once you shine that up, make sure you get the flux on there pretty quick, because you don't want to leave it sitting around and oxidizing again. That means you just have to start sanding it clean again. So once you got to that point there, I've already prepared this one, this elbow here. I've already shined up the inside of both holes with the battery and the 100 grit sandpaper. Found a scrap length of other ½ inch inside diameter tubing. So that's all we have to do here. As you can see, just stick it on whatever orientation it needs to be in, whether it needs to be up, down, sideways. I'll just do it this way for demonstration purposes. Got a little bit too much on there, no big deal. Just get yourself a cloth or whatever, wipe yourself clean. So once these are inside the fittings, are all polished, shiny and clean, as well as the ends of your pipes, probably go in about an inch. You can even put a mark on the pipe before you put the flux on, that way you'll know that your fitting's gone all the way in. Or you could even, so much as, if you're good with just eyeballing things, you could put one, say, an inch back. Now when you put the fitting on, as long as you have that distance visual, then you know that fitting's gone all the way. That's the most important part, is to make sure that fitting is on there all the way. You don't want it partially on, because if the water pressure decides over time to make your joint fail, then you're going to get a leak and maybe some really expensive water damage in your house. Alright? So those parts are all stuck on nice and tight and everything. So we'll fire up the torch and we'll get the solder flowing. Alright, so I can put this in the frame somewhat, show you that I'm actually lighting a torch. And we'll crank that up. Okay, rule of thumb here, whenever you're doing any soldering any plumbing fittings like this, is always, excuse me, always heat the fitting, don't heat the pipe. It's just an old school trade recommendation, if you will. Heat kind of, excuse me, heat kind of rises, so if you can get at the bottom, right, but you want to try to heat them, so I'll just do one joint at a time, it's no big deal. And the deal is here is to heat the joint evenly on the fitting, and what happens, you'll see the flux start to bubble. That means you're probably getting close. Now I'll just mention one more thing here, is if you can't get at some part where you're around the pipe and you're in tight, proximity to something, you can always bend the solder and use it like a J-hook, so to speak, and get behind something. But for this application here, I'm just going to be kind of going, well, almost straight in because of the access I have here on the workbench. So how will you know it's hot enough? Well, you just watch the solder. When it starts flowing readily, right? I've got too much coffee in my system. It'll actually draw that solder in there. And because we're on the vertical here, that solder will just go all underneath there, and you can go underneath it all the way around. And once it starts dripping out of there, you're pretty much done. When you get a blob or two of solder dropping off the other end of it, then you're good. Now you can work on to the other one here too while that one semi-cools. No, it looks like we're smoking the pipe. The flux is making a... That's all there is to it. Oops, we're shaky. Ouch, and it's hot. Another thing you don't want to do is you don't want a blob of this solder dropping on your skin. And if you don't like the looks of it, you can just get yourself a rag or something, being careful not to touch the molten solder, and give it a wipe. It's no big deal, right? Just got to be careful when you do that. Some professional plumbers, they will take a wet rag after they've done their joint and maybe look a little better. I don't know, I got to quit the coffee because it's It's affecting my nerves here. Not the best looking joint, but I know the solder's in that joint though, just the same. Actually, a wet rag would probably work better than this this paper towel here. It's just one of those days, that's all. It's no big deal. As long as you got the joint nice and hot and that solder. If you look on the bottom, if you're doing a horizontal soldering job, you'll see a blob of solder on the far side, which I can see underneath there. Now what I'll do is I'll just turn the torch off and get it out of the way so we can see what's going on. I'll just put the torch out of the way. Just let it go for some background noise. Alright, so I got some vice grips here, back to you. And we'll just clamp onto that. Thing's hot, right? So we'll just loosen off the vise here. Kind of got a good example of what a good solder joint looks like and what a not so good one looks like. Like I was saying, on the other side there, you'll see because of the angle it's on, it's still kind of hot. That's a molten piece of solder there. But you can see the blob, and it's completely around on this good side here. But the solder does get, I think it's capillary action in the heat. It'll actually draw the solder in, so you don't have to worry about it making its way. Once you see a band of solder all the way around the pipe and the fitting. And the telltale is when you see that little blob of solder sitting on the downward side of your joint. And another thing to be careful of is if you're ever doing any soldering that's overhead, okay, you really got to watch yourself. When you get a blob of molten solder on your skin, it hurts like, well, let's say hell. The thing is here too is you always want to make sure that there's no copper showing where there's an incomplete solder flow, because that will give you a leak. Okay, if you're not sure, you can always redo the joint. It's not a big deal. Reheat it. And you can probably see, even with the bad side there, you'll see the solder's gone all the way around. Okay, and on this side it's a better example. I'm glad it kind of did that. Then you know what to be looking out for. If they're both perfect joints, then you say, hey, I'll never get a perfect, or a bad joint rather. And there's a fairly good one. Like I say, to get a better look to it, you can get a wet rag and it'll look more like this. If I can hold it still enough. This one here is kind of smooth because we're on the upper surface here. That's what you're checking for after you've completed your solder job. Remember, it stays hot for a while, so don't touch it unless you got gloves on. Alright? So that's basically as simple as it gets. Like I say, you might have a good day, you might have a bad day. They're all different. Okay, so there's basically how you solder. And remember, if you're, I'll reiterate what I was saying, there's, make sure you use some sheet metal or something, or wet the wooden framing members down, because every now and again on the news you hear of construction buildings while they're in the framing stage and or plumbing pipe installation. That's if they're still using the copper type solder in type things. Nowadays there's a lot of plastic piping for water supply, what they call potable water that you and I drink. So that's basically it, and how to solder fittings together. Remember the trick? Always heat the fitting, not the pipe. And then you always look for that complete flow of solder 360 degrees around the pipe. If you've seen some missing there, then that means your solder is either not sticking or you just haven't put enough in yet. And at the same time, you don't want to overdo it with too much solder, because you get the solder, and if it happens to get inside there, that's going to be forced through once the water pressure is activated through the pipe, through the shutoff valve. Alright? So basically that's it. Make sure you heat the fitting, get it nice and hot, and once that solder starts to flow, then you know it's hot enough. Don't get it too hot, because that also creates a few problems now and again as well. So once that solder's flowing nice and freely, you know you've got temperature, and you can actually take the torch head where the flame comes out and move it back and forth around. The thing is even heating, that's the trick. Alright, that's what I got to say in this video for today anyway, folks. Hope you enjoyed it. So have yourselves a nice day, and bye for now.